Abandoned Mustang Mare and Foal left tied to a tree. What happened next will shock you. The night was pitch black. The sky above had no stars, and the moon was hidden behind thick clouds. The forest was eerily quiet, with only the occasional rustle of leaves. Deep in the heart of this silence stood a Mustang Mare, tied firmly to a large tree. Her body was stiff, struggling against the tight ropes that bound her. She tugged and twisted with all her strength, but the ropes did not loosen. They were too tight, digging into her skin. The fear in her eyes was unmistakable as she tried in vain to escape. Beside her, her newborn foal stood, its small body trembling with uncertainty. The foal was weak, barely strong enough to stand on its own. Its tiny legs wobbled beneath it as it clung to its mother, seeking warmth and safety. The mare gently nuzzled her baby, trying to comfort it, her own heart heavy with dread. She could feel the growing weight of the danger creeping toward them, but there was nothing she could do. Her foal, innocent and unaware of the threat, pressed closer to her, seeking comfort and protection. The mare's heart raced. Her instinct as a mother was to protect her baby at any cost, but she was helpless. The ropes held her tightly in place. She could not run, and the foal was too weak to move. They were trapped, alone, exposed, with no way to escape what was coming. The feeling of being abandoned, of having no one to protect them, was suffocating. The air around them grew colder, and the sounds of the forest seemed to grow fainter. But in the stillness, the mare's senses sharpened. She could feel the weight of the danger lurking nearby. Not far from where the mare and foal were tied, a figure appeared in the darkness. The farmer had come to check on them, but his eyes held no sympathy, no care. His face was hard and unfeeling, as though he had already made up his mind. He walked slowly toward them, his boots crunching softly on the ground with each step. When the mare saw him, her body tensed, and her heart sank. She had hoped for a miracle, maybe for him to untie her, to offer some kind of help. But there was none. The farmer stopped in front of her, looking her up and down with cold, uncaring eyes. He saw only two animals he no longer wanted or needed. He didn't care about the mare's struggle or the foal's vulnerability. To him, they were nothing more than a burden. The mare, still struggling against her ropes, whimpered softly, trying to appeal to him with her eyes. But the farmer wasn't moved. He had made his decision. The mare was wild and untamable, and the foal was too weak to survive. They were draining his resources, and he couldn't afford that. They were useless to him now. Without saying a word, the farmer turned his back and walked away. His footsteps grew quieter, his figure fading into the dark forest. The mare watched him go, her heart breaking. She couldn't understand how anyone could be so heartless, so indifferent to the lives of those who depended on them. But there was no time to dwell on that now. He had left them behind, and they were on their own. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. The mare's ears flicked in the direction where the farmer had walked, as if expecting him to return. But he didn't. The cruel reality set in. They were alone, abandoned in the dark wilderness. As the last sound of the farmer's footsteps faded into the distance, the air grew colder. The forest seemed to grow darker, and a sense of unease filled the space around them. The mare's sharp senses detected something that sent a chill down her spine. She heard it, a low growl. At first, she thought it might be the wind, but it was too steady, too menacing. The growl came again, louder this time, and this time it was not just one sound. It was joined by more. The wolves were coming. The mare's heart skipped a beat as her eyes darted around the darkened forest. Slowly, from the shadows, a pair of glowing yellow eyes appeared. Then another, and another. One by one, the wolves began to emerge, their eyes gleaming in the darkness, watching them intently. There was no doubt about it now, the pack had found them. The mare stepped protectively in front of her foal, her body shaking with fear. She tried to lunge forward, but the ropes held her tightly, making any movement difficult. The foal, still unaware of the danger, pressed closer to her side, its tiny body trembling. The mare's breathing quickened, and she could feel the weight of the pack closing in around them. The wolves circled them slowly, each step deliberate, as if savoring the moment before the hunt began. The leader of the pack, larger and more menacing than the others, stepped forward, his teeth bared in a snarl. He was the first to approach. The others followed, their bodies moving in sync. The mare's body trembled as she faced them. She had no way to fight them off, no way to escape. She was trapped. In that moment, the mare's protective instincts flared. She pressed closer to her foal, trying to shield it from the wolves, though she knew it was hopeless. Her body was already weak from the struggle, and the foal's chances of survival were slim at best. But she would not give up. She would fight to her last breath if it meant protecting her baby from the pack of wolves surrounding them. But as the leader of the pack closed in, the mare knew the reality of their situation. The wolves were relentless, their hunger driving them forward. The night was dark, the forest silent, and the sound of the wolves' growls echoed in the distance as the mother and foal faced their uncertain fate. The mare's heart raced as her instincts screamed at her to flee, to run as fast as she could and take her foal with her. Every part of her wanted to fight, to escape this nightmare, but reality held her back. The ropes were tight and unforgiving, holding her in place, restricting her every move. She tried once again, desperate to break free. Her body tensed as she pulled with all her strength, the muscles in her legs straining, her breath ragged. The ropes dug into her skin, causing pain, but it wasn't enough to break her spirit. She could hear the wolves' growls growing louder, and the scent of danger filled the air. They were getting closer, and her foal, too small and fragile to run, pressed even tighter against her, unaware of the threat that was closing in. The mare's desperation deepened. She couldn't afford to fail. Her foal needed her now more than ever. Her eyes darted frantically around the dark forest, searching for an escape. But there was none. The trees loomed like silent witnesses, their shadows casting an almost suffocating presence around them. The mare felt a wave of helplessness wash over her. She could hear the wolves now, their breathing heavy and their eyes fixed on her. But still, she didn't stop. She kept pulling, kept fighting against the ropes, against the hopelessness of the situation. Her instincts told her to protect her baby at all costs, and she refused to give up, no matter how impossible it seemed. She had no strength left, but she was willing to risk everything, because the love of a mother is stronger than anything. She would fight until she couldn't fight anymore. The wolves were no longer just a threat in the distance. They had closed the circle around the mare and her foal. There was no longer any hope of escape. The leader of the pack moved silently through the shadows, his yellow eyes glowing with hunger, while the others followed closely behind, their movements as smooth and deadly as a shadow in the night. The mare could feel them circling, their presence closing in on all sides. It felt as though the world had narrowed down to just her and her foal, with the wolves tightening their grip on the life that was slipping away. The mare's ears flicked back as the pack moved in, their growls low and menacing. Her body trembled in fear, but she stood tall, pressing herself closer to the foal. Her legs were shaking from exhaustion, but her heart kept pushing her forward. She knew that in the end, there was only one thing that mattered: her foal's survival. She couldn't stop them all, but she would protect her baby with everything she had. The lead wolf took another step forward, his teeth bared in a snarl. The mare's gaze locked onto his, and she felt the finality of the situation. There was no way she could fight them all, and no way she could escape. The dark night seemed to grow even darker as the wolves closed in, and the sound of their growls grew louder, vibrating through the air. The mare's breath became quicker, more erratic, as the sense of inevitability washed over her. Her foal, still pressed against her, was unaware of the danger. The wolves had surrounded them completely now, and the mare could do nothing but wait, every fiber of her being screaming for a miracle. Her strength was fading, and she could feel her body growing weaker with each passing second. The wolves were ready. They had waited long enough, and as the mare stood there, helpless and resigned, she knew that this was the moment she had feared, the moment when life and death would clash, and the fate of her foal hung in the balance. The wolves were ready to strike, and death felt inevitable. Just as the tension in the air reached its peak, something unexpected happened. The wolves, who had been circling the mare and her foal with bloodlust in their eyes, suddenly stopped. It was a strange, unsettling pause. The leader of the pack, the largest and most menacing of them all, stood still, his glowing yellow eyes fixed on the mare. The growls that had filled the air went silent. His pack, normally relentless in their pursuit, stood motionless, waiting for some sort of signal, as if unsure of what to do next. The mare's heart skipped a beat. Her body, which had been trembling with fear just moments before, suddenly went still. The foal, sensing the change in the air, pressed closer to her. The wolves were not attacking. They were waiting, but for what? The mare could not understand. Was this just a brief reprieve before the attack? Or was there something more? Her instincts screamed at her to run, but the ropes still held her tightly in place. She was trapped, unable to move, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, there was a flicker of hope. The wolves had hesitated. But why? The answer was unclear, and it only added to the growing sense of confusion. The pack seemed to be waiting for something beyond the hunt. The leader of the pack took a step forward, his eyes never leaving the mare. But he did not attack. Instead, he paused again, his body tense, as if fighting with an inner conflict. The mare's confusion deepened. What was going on? Why weren't they attacking? As the silence hung thick in the air, the leader of the pack seemed to wrestle with something within himself. His yellow eyes flickered, a flash of something softer, something human-like, that seemed out of place for a creature so wild, so deadly. The other wolves remained still, as if they too were waiting for something to happen. The atmosphere was charged with an inexplicable tension, and the moment felt as though it was suspended in time. Then, without warning, the alpha wolf's gaze shifted. His sharp eyes softened slightly, as if something from his past had just resurfaced, something that caused him to hesitate. It wasn't just hunger or instinct that controlled him now. There was something more, a connection that was buried deep within him. The mare noticed this change, her heart racing with a new kind of fear and wonder. What was happening? For a brief, fleeting moment, the alpha wolf's stance softened. His body, once poised to strike, relaxed, and his gaze turned from hunger to something else entirely. A deep, painful recognition. The memories, buried long ago, seemed to be flooding back to him. Long ago, before he became the cold, calculating leader of the pack, he had been just a pup. He had once been cared for, nurtured, and protected by a mother. A mother who had loved him fiercely, just as the mare loved her foal. He had known the warmth of her embrace, the comfort of her presence, just as the mare was trying to offer the same to her baby. But those memories had been buried deep, buried by the harsh realities of the wild. Now, in this moment, those memories came rushing back. The alpha wolf's heart, once hardened by the brutality of survival, felt a tug, something ancient, something he had lost long ago. The mare, caught in the alpha's gaze, could feel the sudden shift in energy. It was as if the wolves themselves were unsure of what to do now. The change in the alpha wolf was undeniable. The hesitation that had taken over him now spread to the rest of the pack. One by one, the wolves stopped moving, their sharp eyes no longer fixated on the mare and foal. Instead, they began to move closer together, circling the two with a sense of unity that was unexpected. The atmosphere shifted again. The growls that once filled the air were replaced with a strange, almost protective energy. The wolves, who had moments ago seemed like a pack of predators closing in for the kill, now acted differently. The alpha wolf, who had once been poised to strike, now stood with his pack, not as an aggressor, but as a guardian. The mare, though still bound by the ropes, couldn't believe what she was witnessing. The wolves had taken a step back, not in fear, but in a strange display of protection. The pack, normally wild and unforgiving, was now standing guard, watching over the mare and her foal. It was as if something had changed within them, a shift in behavior that seemed impossible but undeniable. The mare, still filled with uncertainty, stood in awe as the alpha wolf took one final glance at her and her foal before turning to face the rest of the pack. The wolves stood tall, forming a protective barrier between the mother and her baby and the dangers of the wild. They weren't just predators now. They were protectors, guardians of a life they had once considered prey. In that moment, the mare understood something profound. The wolves were no longer a threat. They had become something else, a strange and unexpected ally. The love the mare felt for her foal was mirrored in the eyes of the alpha wolf. And as the night stretched on, it became clear. In the wild, even the fiercest predators could feel the pull of love, of protection, and of the bond between mother and child. The wolves, in a turn of fate no one could have predicted, had become the guardians of the helpless mare and foal, standing watch over them as they awaited the dawn of a new day. As the moon climbed higher in the night sky, a quiet stillness descended over the forest. The wolves, having taken their unusual protective stance, stood vigilant, their eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. The mare, though still unable to move freely, felt a faint stirring of hope as the night stretched on. The foal, exhausted from the terrifying ordeal, nuzzled into her side for warmth and comfort. Suddenly, the peaceful silence was broken by the faint sound of footsteps in the distance, soft but unmistakable. The wolves, alert as ever, tensed, their ears flicking toward the sound. The alpha wolf's head turned sharply, and the pack followed suit, their senses heightened. Was this the sound of another predator approaching? Or could it be something else entirely? The mare's ears perked as well, her eyes wide with a glimmer of curiosity. She could hear it too, the sound of someone or something moving through the brush. It was still distant, but growing closer with each passing second. The wolves did not move, but their posture shifted slightly, as if waiting for the unknown presence to reveal itself. Was it a danger or a potential savior? The footsteps grew louder, and the tension in the air was palpable. The mare's heart began to race again, not from fear, but from the sudden rush of hope that flooded her chest. Could someone be coming to help them? Could someone be brave enough to approach the wolves? Brave enough to save them from the dark night that surrounded them? As the footsteps grew nearer, the figure of a man slowly emerged from the shadows of the forest. He was rugged, dressed in worn, weathered clothes, his face obscured by the darkness. But the mare could sense something different in him, a presence that was not threatening, but protective. The wolves, sensing this too, remained still, their posture neither hostile nor welcoming. They simply observed him, their leader's gaze locked on the newcomer. The man stopped at the edge of the clearing, his eyes widening in disbelief at the sight before him. He had come to the forest with a single goal, to find the lost horses and bring them to safety. But what he found was beyond anything he could have imagined. There, in the moonlight, stood the mare, tied to a tree, her foal by her side, and surrounding them, unbelievably, was the pack of wolves. For a moment, the man stood frozen, his mind struggling to comprehend the scene unfolding before him. The wolves, who had been predators, now appeared strangely protective. They were standing guard, their eyes flicking between the man and the mare, as if ensuring that no harm would come to either. The sight of the wild animals, once a threat, now acting as guardians, left the man speechless. The mare's gaze met his, a silent plea in her eyes, and for a split second, the man felt the weight of her fear, her desperation, and her hope all at once. He had to do something. He couldn't stand by and let this moment slip away. But he also knew that the wolves, though strangely protective, were still wild animals. Could he really approach them without risking everything? Could he truly save them all? The man's heart raced as he surveyed the scene before him. He knew that the decision he was about to make could be the difference between life and death for the mare and her foal. The wolves, though not attacking, still posed a significant danger. They were unpredictable, their instincts sharp, and he had no way of knowing how they would react to his presence. He took a cautious step forward, his boots crunching softly against the forest floor. The wolves' eyes followed him closely, their bodies tense but still unmoving. The alpha wolf's gaze was unwavering, as though he was silently weighing the man's intentions. The man's mind raced. He could hear the steady breathing of the mare, feel her tension in the air. She needed help. And yet, the wolves surrounded her like an impenetrable barrier. To approach was a risk, one he wasn't sure he was willing to take. But as the man took another step, he saw the foal, helpless, vulnerable, and desperate for safety. He couldn't turn back now. He had come for a reason, and that reason was standing right in front of him. The mare's eyes pleaded with him to take action. He couldn't fail her. He couldn't fail the foal. With a final deep breath, the man made his choice. He began to move toward the mare slowly, deliberately. Every step was calculated, every movement made with care. The wolves watched, their bodies tense, ready to act at any moment. The man knew that any wrong move could provoke them, but he kept his eyes locked on the mare, trusting that he could protect her in the face of the unknown. The tension was unbearable. With each step, the man drew closer to the mare and her foal, closer to the impossible choice he had made. Would the wolves allow him to save them, or would they strike, unwilling to let go of their prey? The man had no way of knowing, but one thing was certain. He would not back down. The stakes were too high. The choice was too important. The lives of the mare, the foal, and even the wolves themselves hung in the balance. The tension in the air was almost unbearable. Every muscle in the man's body was on high alert as he moved closer to the mare. His heart pounded in his chest, and every step seemed louder than the last. The wolves stood still, their eyes following his every move. But the most terrifying of them all was the alpha. It locked eyes with the man. A cold, unyielding stare, as if saying one wrong move and everything changes. The man froze. His body knew this was a game of survival, not just for the mare and her foal, but for himself too. He could feel the weight of the alpha's gaze like a physical force. The warning was clear. No sudden movements. The slightest twitch, the smallest misstep, could set the wolves into motion. With the alpha watching, the man knew he had to be careful. His breath came slow, steady, as he cautiously reached into his pocket for the knife. The wolves didn't move yet. A wave of realization hit him. The wolves weren't just guarding the mare and foal. They were waiting for something. What was it? Was this all part of a silent understanding? Was there more at play here than mere instinct? The rope tied around the mare's legs was thick and frayed from the long hours of struggle. The man's hands shook as he brought the knife to the knot. He could feel the wolf's eyes on him, the tension in the air growing thicker by the second. The slightest wrong move and all of this could end in disaster. But there was no turning back now. As he slowly began to cut through the thick rope, the mare looked at him with eyes that seemed to carry 1,000 stories. Fear, relief, hope. With each pull of the blade, the knot loosened. It was like the world was holding its breath, everyone waiting for the moment when she would finally be free. And then, with one final tug, the rope fell away. For a heartbeat, the mare didn't move. The wolves were still silent, watching, waiting. The man stepped back, his eyes never leaving the mare. Was it really happening? Was she free? Then, as if she understood that the danger had passed, the mare took a slow, cautious step forward. Her hooves grazed the earth, and she stood tall, still trembling, but no longer bound. It was an incredible sight, but it wasn't over yet. The man's heart raced. The foal, still curled up on the ground, too weak to move, was the next challenge. The foal's body was frail, almost lifeless, its tiny frame struggling to even lift its head. The man glanced at the mare, who was now standing with a protective stance. Her gaze was locked on her foal, and the trust in her eyes was undeniable. But the foal, her baby, wasn't going to make it on its own. It was too weak, too broken. The mare took a step forward, nuzzling her baby gently. Her eyes were full of a silent plea. She didn't need to say a word. The man could see it in her gaze. Save him, please. The man knew the danger was far from over. The wolves were still watching, their eyes never leaving him. But the foal couldn't wait much longer. With a deep breath, the man bent down to gently lift the foal. As his arms cradled the tiny creature, He felt its fragile body trembling against him. Its mother stepped closer, nudging the foal, encouraging it to trust the stranger who was now its only hope. The man stood, the foal in his arms. His body was tense, knowing that the slightest movement could turn this fragile balance upside down. The mare followed him, stepping lightly, her eyes never leaving the man. And then, just as he began to move away from the wolves, the alpha wolf's gaze softened. Just a fraction, but enough. The wolves were no longer just watching. They had become guardians. The man's steps were slow, deliberate. The mare and foal stayed close behind, a protective unit. But the wolves, who had been their threat, their fear, were now watching over them, ensuring their safe passage. The impossible had just happened. The man had crossed the line between predator and protector. The wolves had allowed the mare and foal to escape, and in that moment, the forest felt a little less dangerous. A little more like a sanctuary. The news spread through the small town like wildfire. People could hardly believe what they were hearing. The mare, the foal, both were alive. After everything that had happened, the thought of them surviving seemed impossible. But there they were, standing in the light of day, their bodies battered but their spirits unbroken. The townspeople had long heard rumors about the farmer's cruelty, but no one had ever dared to speak out. He was a respected man in the community, a figure of authority and fear. No one had the courage to challenge him until now. Word got around quickly. The farmer had left them for the wolves. Neighbors began to gather, some in disbelief, others with anger and resentment building up in their chests. They couldn't understand how someone could do such a thing to innocent animals. How could anyone tie a mother and her baby to a tree, leaving them to die at the hands of wolves? Faces hardened as the truth began to spread. The sight of the mare and foal, alive, breathing and free, was a symbol of hope, but it also opened old wounds. The town had unknowingly allowed this cruelty to happen for far too long. The farmer was not prepared for what happened next. He hadn't anticipated that the mare and foal would survive. He thought the wolves would take care of his problem for him. But as the days passed, and the animals miraculously returned to life, the farmer's world began to unravel. It didn't take long for the town to learn the truth about the farmer's dark secret. Once they discovered his cruelty, the fear of his power faded away, and it was replaced by anger. His reputation, once built on years of control and fear, came crashing down. People began to demand justice. The farmer tried to backtrack, panicking. He had no answers, no excuses to offer for what he had done. The truth had been laid bare, and he couldn't hide behind his wealth or status anymore. The entire town had seen the horses, his horses, alive against all odds. They had witnessed the act of cruelty firsthand. The farmer's lies began to unravel as quickly as the ropes that had once bound the mare. His fear was palpable. He wasn't just facing the wrath of the townspeople. He was facing the reality of what his actions had brought. There would be no escaping the consequences of his betrayal. In the weeks that followed the rescue, the mare and her foal found a new home, a sanctuary. The scars on their bodies were healing, but the emotional wounds would take time. Yet, with every passing day, the bond between mother and foal grew stronger. They were free now, no longer bound by cruelty or fear, and they flourished in the peace they had found. The mare, once so fragile, now stood tall with confidence. Her foal, though still young, was gaining strength every day. It was a new beginning, a new life filled with the promise of better days ahead. The once broken creatures had found a place where they could be safe, loved, and cherished. The man who had saved them continued to watch over them, making sure they thrived in their new surroundings. The mare would never forget the stranger who had freed her and her foal. But as time passed, it was clear that they no longer needed saving. They were beginning to heal on their own. But the story didn't end there. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a figure appeared on the outskirts of the sanctuary. It was the alpha wolf, moving silently through the trees, followed by the rest of the pack. The wolves had been watching from a distance for days, their presence not a threat, but a reminder of the bond that had formed between them and the mare and foal. The man stood at the edge of the sanctuary, watching the wolves as they gathered just beyond the fence. Their eyes met, his and the alpha's, and for a moment, there was no fear, no tension. It was as if the two of them understood something deep within. The wolves, once predators, had become silent guardians of the creatures they had once threatened. The alpha's eyes lingered on the mare and foal, and then, with a soft growl that seemed to carry years of history, it turned and led its pack away into the shadows. They didn't need to stay. They had done their part. The wolves had ensured their safety, and now they would disappear into the wilderness, leaving behind a tale of unlikely protectors. As the wolves faded into the night, the mare and foal stood side by side, watching them go. There were no words, only a deep, silent understanding between them. The bond forged in the darkness, in the face of death and danger, was something no one would ever forget. The story of the mare, the foal, and the wolves would live on in the town's legends. It would be passed down through generations, a tale of survival, of compassion, and of unexpected alliances. The wolves, once feared as monsters, had proven to be protectors, and the mare's journey from abandonment to freedom had shown that even the most desperate situations can lead to new beginnings. And in the quiet, as the wind whispered through the trees, there was peace. A peace earned through sacrifice, bravery, and the unspoken bond between creatures of different worlds. A legend had been born, one that would live on long after the wolves had gone and the mare and foal had moved on with their lives. The man watched as the last of the wolves disappeared into the distance, knowing that the story was far from over. But for now, the mare and her foal were free, and the world seemed a little bit brighter because of it. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to share it with others who believe in the power of compassion and second chances. Leave a comment below to share your thoughts. What do you think about the incredible bond between the wolves and the horses? Would you have done the same in the farmer's place? And remember to hit the like button if you believe that kindness and bravery can change lives, no matter how impossible the odds may seem. Subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories that remind us all of the strength found in unexpected places. Thank you for watching, and let's keep spreading hope together.